First, we'll start with what is capitalism. A lot of people will probably kind of gut reaction say it has to do with the economy. It has to do with jobs and the economy and how things are produced and traded and all this stuff. And that is certainly in the right direction. But capitalism is, at this point in history, not only an economic system, but really it's a whole encompassing thing around our society and culture, in addition to economics, that essentially dominates our whole sense of society and politics at this point. It's become so pervasive in everything we discuss that it's not really just an economic system anymore. There's a lot of different ways to analyze it, but a nice short essay that comes from social ecology, which we touched on in our Green Party 101 thing last month, is an essay called What is Capitalism?, which identifies 4 characteristics of the entire capitalist system. Again, not just the economy, but how it impacts society and culture as a whole. And these 4 basic characteristics are, first, commodity production. And what that means is that items become commoditized. I have a hard time saying that. It's kind of a complicated word, but they become commodities, which means that their main goal, their main purpose is for being sold, for being traded on the market. So something like, you can have a cell phone, for example. Cell phone does lots of really cool stuff. It allows you to call people, text people, do all kinds of things, right? But to a capitalist mindset, all of that stuff is kind of secondary. The main point of making a cell phone is because I can put it on the market and sell it and make profit. And that's what we're talking about with commodities. It's this profit first motive, instead of asking who needs it, what is it used for, and making sure that's allocated to the right place. The second characteristic is markets. You can't have commodities without markets, in a sense, right? That it's all about making profits and selling them on these markets, which are exchanges of goods or money and things like that. And markets can exist outside of capitalism, but again, under capitalism, the market has so dominated our culture and society that we view everything as market transactions. When we, even when we talk as humans, like between each other, we start talking about signing contracts with each other and things, all these very market-focused terms, instead of just kind of behaving as humans. So that kind of infiltrates our concepts. We'll come back to that. A third characteristic is the existence of property as investment. So some people will just call this private property, but that can get a little bit confusing, because we're not talking about like your toothbrush that you own or something, right? Some little thing that you're using for yourself. That's not private property in this sense. Like, yes, it's yours. That's personal property. It's this. What we're talking about here is different. We're talking about somebody owns something to do with the economy in particular, like a factory or resources or something, and they say, I own it because I have this piece of paper. I own it because I say that I own it, and it doesn't belong to the community or the workers or anything like that. It belongs to some capitalist investor. So that makes it different from personal property. And then finally, there's exploited labor. You could also say like wage labor, for example. And it's just that workers essentially don't have any control over what is produced and what is distributed, where all those resources go. Instead, it's those investors, it's those capitalists who are essentially calling the shots and saying, hey, because I own it, this is what we're doing, and you have to do it this way. And just kind of fundamentally, because workers are not allowed to be involved in those decision-making things, they get exploited one way or another. They're not paid fairly for what they're producing, because the capitalism always sucks profits off of it. You're never getting the full benefit of what you're producing, right? So when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about these 4 characteristics and how they interact with each other. Like, it's not even just them by themselves, but how they interact with each other to create this whole society that we see in front of us. So I think Chris has some more comments about that. So
yeah, I mean, and kind of what, with the interconnection, it's like our labor is commoditized.
yes,
Right? Labor, the workers in and of themselves, the fact that someone has to do the work is a commodity to the capitalist. It's just another part of the equation, like materials and rent and utility bills and that kind of thing. But I think it's, we're starting off our 101 with, characteristics of capitalism, and it's where we need to start when we have these conversations on the ground too, right? Ask your average person what capitalism is, and you will get nothing that comes anywhere near describing a socioeconomic system, right? Nothing that comes near describing a political system, nothing that comes anywhere near describing something that has the totality that we are dealing with modern capitalism. So it's really important to start there, right? Because if you're going to start talking to somebody about socialism and they don't understand, they don't understand what capitalism is, what socialism is, the basis of these terms, it's going to be a really hard conversation, right? So we really in these kind of, when you're talking to the general public, when you're advocating for socialism, we've got to start with this 101 absolute basic level stuff, right? Before we got on, I told Garrett a story about when I was in school, and I had an advocate, a capitalist proponent coming at me on social media, and I asked them to define capitalism. And they basically said, it's a system where everyone has opportunity. That's not a definition. And this was someone in a political science program, right? That understands what political definitions mean and what theory means and how these things work. But when asked to defend the system that they advocated for, they couldn't even come close to putting a reasonable definition out. They just threw out myth. They threw out propaganda, right? And that's something we have to deal with, is that most people have a complete lack of understanding of what capitalism actually is and what socialism actually is. So we've really got to start, right here with the basics. And every time it snows, right, you see socialist snowplow memes, and then someone goes off and calls the military and cops socialism, and then we're just completely out of words meaning things, right? But this is what we have to deal with, right? Even people I know who think of themselves as self-proclaimed socialists often fall into this trap of thinking of social programs, which are moderations within capitalism, as socialism, right? And even things like unions in their context within the capitalist system are moderations of capitalism. They aren't, especially when we're talking about the big corporate unions. We're not talking about worker ownership and that kind of thing, which is really what it comes down to. Democratic control of the means of production. So,
yeah, definitely. So, Chris hit on some interesting points here about, the myths around capitalism, and that's what we have to talk about next before we can really get at what we're going for in terms of socialism. So, but try to keep these characteristics in mind when you're thinking about it, that, underneath capitalism, again, there's that commodity production, there's the focus on, is this something I could sell to make profit, as opposed to, is it useful to society, for example? And the role of markets and market interactions in society, property rights over how things are produced, and treating labor as a commodity and exploiting it. These are important characteristics as we move forward.